The project I'm going to be talking about is called Peace Building, Language and Social Cohesion. It's run by UNICEF with UNESCO's collaboration, and it's funded by a very large grant from the government of the Netherlands to both Africa and Asia, entitled Peace Building and Education. And it's trying to reverse a long pattern of conflict resolution in which education has been neglected. In other words, people often reserve negotiations and discussions around conflict resolution just for jurists and military people and people like that. But in fact, the research shows that education is neglected at very great risk of producing a relapse into conflict because of the tensions that are often located within education. It works across several Southeast Asian settings. I'm only going to talk about Myanmar today. Obviously, the deep south of Thailand, Peninsular Malaysia, Sabah, Sarawak, and Myanmar. And it forms part of this. So I'm going to describe this first, which is the Comprehensive Education Sector Review, which is really just a whole lot of plans. And as I go through this, I'd like you to just keep in mind that there are dozens of donor agencies involved with the the conduct of this particular review, and we have to just imagine what it would be for a society coming through some of the tensions that have been described in the previous talks to deal with something as complex and multilateral as this. It fits into what's called the overall reform agenda of the Ministry of Education, adopted in February of last year, which was to allow the international community a comprehensive database from which to plan their interventions. And its main aim, as it says here, is to play its part in raising the overall level of social and economic development based, obviously, on human development questions. And this is a kind of motto of the Ministry of Education, to produce a learning society capable of facing the challenges of the knowledge age by comparison with the reality in many places, or most places in the country. That's a big aim, a modern developed nation through education. Not only are there many donor agencies, but this Comprehensive Education Sector Review actually involves most of the government, really, in some way or other, very large parts of the government through those ministries. Its overall objective in 3 phases, which I'll mention in a moment, and I think the most important one really is the first one, so that people know really well for long-term planning where the points of likely productive intervention are going to be, on the basis of knowing well what the situation actually is, which no one really does at present. The knowledge base on the strengths and challenges in the education system to support evidence-based policies, legislation, and costed education sector plans. Underlying it all, of course, are the commitments to one principle, or there are all the principles of the Millennium Development Goals, but one in particular, which is education for all. And education for all, the most important principle of education for all itself, is getting every primary school child into a full sequence of serious schooling for at least 5 years. And I'll mention in a few moments what the prospects of that being achieved are. So every child to have the opportunity to complete a full cycle of basic education of decent quality. The Myanmar officials stress that they have, in fact, this fits into something they promulgated in 2001, to achieve UBE, which is Universal Basic Education, by 2016, and USE, Universal Secondary Education, by 2031. And as I said, it's supported by a huge number of development partners and various agencies of different kinds. Over the next 2 years, the specific aims are to promulgate a new education law, that is to bring together multiple legal instruments into one, and to make that the fundamental basis of education. To decentralise administration, this is deeply important from political, ethnic and other kinds of ways, but it's also important administratively. To produce a new curriculum for basic education, meaning essentially primary education, but also in a separate process, adult education for non-literate adults. Improving teacher quality and new learner assessment systems. Those are the provisional reform priorities. And as I said, the single most likely outcome, if nothing else is achieved out of this process, it will at least produce a comprehensive map of the education system that people will be able, I think, relatively credibly to be able to use. We're now at the top point, the rapid assessment. It's supposed to have been completed in February. It's been put off for a couple of months because of the really big task that it involves, which is a sector-wide assessment of urgent reform issues. And by urgent reform issues, what they really mean is finding out what's not working, what's wrong, what things could be productively intervened with to make them work. Then from when that's finished, the rapid assessment, the in-depth analysis, which goes to December of this year, that too probably will miss its target, but it won't be by too much. Large-scale and participation discussions on change. And then by mid-next year, a costed education sector plan fitting in with a 2-year structure and then a 5-year structure for the government in general. The work that I'm going to talk about now that I'm mostly interested in is the question of language and language rights in particular, questions of literacy, children's access to a full curriculum, and questions of identity and ethnicity. It's linked to this CESR process that I've talked about, and it kicks off from the first one. So as soon as this is completed, we'll be able to get started with our activity. It's funded directly from the UNICEF project, separate funding from the government of the Netherlands. There's funds from the government of Japan, from, maybe we'll be able to purloin some Australian dollars and other finance, but basically what's available within this is $60 million over a 4-year basic education program. Before I describe it, I just want to describe a little bit I won't be able to go into much detail of the socio-linguistics, I've only got 5 minutes, of Myanmar. Look, that's probably impossible to deal with. We all know that Myanmar is an extraordinarily complex society linguistically. Most of what we're going to be able to do with this process will concern the intra-ethnic language diversity rather than other questions, but there is some issue around the teaching of English which the government wishes to do. And the last one I want to point out, just like we heard in the previous paper, these statistics are really clearly unreliable. I remember in 1990 working with the International Literacy Year and talking to the Australian Minister for Education at the time, who said, why should Australia be involved in the celebration or marking of International Literacy Year? We have a totally 100% literate population. We did a study over the next year and a half and found that 24% of Australian adults struggle with basic reading and writing. These figures are really most certainly unreliable. I'm not going to be able to talk about this, but the Myanmar child law has within it a clause which is unfortunately not much acted on. Every child shall have the right to maintain his or her cherished language, literature and culture, to profess his or her own religion and to follow his or her own traditions and customs. Within the legal paraphernalia existing already, there are many remits for what we're seeking to do. There are also related activities. The Myanmar authorities, under a UNICEF-sponsored deal, sent a delegation to southern China and other parts of China recently. It was really, from the reports I've read, very effective in opening the eyes to people that it's possible, even in societies that many people in Australia, I think, believe are unsympathetic to minority language rights, that there can be recognition of minority language rights, as there are in many parts of China. Many people don't recognise that. And that the language issue was a really major source of debate between Myanmar and UNICEF and the involvement of the University for the Development of National Races to train remote teachers. Okay, so what we're going to do is a series of 4 dialogues around resolving local language policy conflicts, which are, of course, critical to the education success of children, critical to the acquisition of literacy in Myanmar language and in English, critical to the learning of second and additional languages, critical to reducing the incredibly high dropout rate from schooling that exists at the moment, and critical to questions of language rights and ethnic identity. Mother tongue-based multilingual education is the principle on which we're working, which has been evolved now for some years through the UNESCO office in Bangkok. It's especially vital for minority, poor, isolated, female, disadvantaged children, especially those, many of them, from low literate homes. I'm sorry, I know this is going rather fast, but there's a lot of material to cover. I'm happy to talk to people who are interested in it. Our priorities, once the rapid assessment phase of the CESR are completed, will be to start what I'm calling community educator expert deliberations. We're going to base them on deliberative democracy techniques of decision making and problem solving, initially in those 3 locations, basically to model how they run, to involve all stakeholders, and to develop local responses to national language questions. I have to finish, and I have finished. I've got 1 minute. So I just might say quickly that these ones will be done, these first 3 that are mentioned there will be done in the second half of this year, and then we'll accelerate the rate of them on the basis of hopefully demonstrating to people both how to do dialogue around solving problems of language and literacy, because there are many small languages that don't have scripts. There are other kinds of issues involved there. Once we have established a model for doing this, I think we'll be able to spread them more widely. Thank you very much for your attention.